just the dynamics of that trade. How much do you weigh in, remembering back to 17? How much does, a Rob, a Glenn, a Nelson, a Rob Laird weigh in on sort of the current player?
It's funny the way it happened and the timing of it, in terms of Lias's timing, in terms of how old he is. It made it really an all-inclusive effort. It's not usually the case. Usually there's either a pro component predominantly or an amateur component predominantly, or even an analytic component predominantly. It's funny, all three were in agreement. All three avenues came to the same conclusion. I know Lias very well because I've known Lias. I've known Lias for 5 years before he was drafted. So I know the family, obviously, with Nick. I know the personality. We really thought that was good value at 60. And as I said, there were a lot of people in the organization that played a big part in making that. And I find that really cool. It's not usually like that. It's just not usually like that. So it was unique, and it was fun.
Question for the European guys drafted. Did the pandemic make it any harder or different to evaluate them?
No, obviously it made it a little harder because you don't have the under 18 tournament. And this year, the under 18 tournament would have been in Detroit. It would have been at the U.S. Development Center. So it would have been the ease of seeing some of the higher rated Europeans all in one place certainly would have made that easy. So we didn't have that. But truthfully, I think a lot of mistakes are made at that tournament. If you're leaving your scouting to use that as a higher level evaluator, I think you're prone to making mistakes. I mean, you're putting a lot of focus into 10 days where a guy could be good or bad. So I've always viewed the under 18 as a little bit of a finishing piece, like that last 5%, maybe that last 7%. And a guy can change things a little bit. A guy, you might go there looking for something. But in terms of a macro level, in terms of pure evaluation for everyone, most of the work should be done before then. If the pandemic if it had started before February, and now you lose 3 or 4 tournaments and you lose 2 separate trips or 3 separate trips over to Europe, that would have had a profound effect. The one thing that actually balanced it is the European leagues were really the only leagues that started up until a week ago with Quebec. So we had about 3 weeks worth of viewings of like the SHL. We had 2 weeks of the Liga between exhibition season and regular season, and then between the various under 20 tournaments. I mean, the Sweden under 20 team played Altuma, so we actually got a lot of views on some of the European guys, and it played a little bit of a role in the pick in the 7th round with Jamson. He was a little bit of an under the radar guy who played in a very low scouted league last year. And, we got views of him in that low scouted league, but that's a much harder evaluation. It's just not a league where guys traditionally come out of. And then we got to see him, how he played in the J20 this year, where he excelled. So some of the questions you might've had last year, where you were able to answer some of those final questions by that league going this year, and other leagues not.
With the players taken in rounds 3 to 7, what are some of the standout tools that you saw in those players?
Okay, if you go from 3 to 7, if you start with Samontoval, speed, skating, he's got excellent quickness, excellent agility, second tier speed, first tier quickness. He's got a really good shot, and his quick hands are able to keep up with his quick feet. That would have stood out for him. Laferriere, he's a bit of an unfinished product. We like what we saw was a high school kid who led his team in scoring, and then he makes the jump to the USHL, which is not an easy jump anyway. And coming from prep school, it makes it even harder. And he comes from prep school and he leads his team in scoring. So we love the fact that this is an underdeveloped kid who finds a way to produce and put numbers on the board, regardless of what level and regardless of his physical maturity. He's got a really good shot. We do think he's got the potential to have a big body as well. So some of those production-based elements, and particularly, he had a good shot, and he gets into danger areas in the offensive zone. Yuho, he was another guy. He started out last year as the third goalie on his junior team.
Wow.
Yeah, he was. I mean, think about that. I mean, and then by February, we're watching him in a tournament playing for the national team, and he then plays a game in Mestis, and so he had a progression that you don't see. He was a really young kid. He was 147 pounds, I think, when the season started last year. He's 167 now. So we saw a kid who really developed, and again, fighting away from third string goalie in junior to playing a pro game in the men's league in Finland. That shows, again, I think a goalie has to be mentally tough. I think there has to be some mental flexibility and some ability to fight through adversity. So he certainly showed that. He's got a really good glove, moves really, really well. He's got a good balance of technical and athletic. Chromiak, high level hockey sense. He was the one guy that slid probably the most based on the guys we drafted. I'm not sure why. He came over to North America halfway through the year and just went about a point a game, and actually just over a point a game. He plays with right, so he's going to be playing in high-level offensive situations. He's a very good puck facilitator. He's a very good playmaker. He reads the play really well, and he's a slightly above average skater with a really good skill level. So, is there anyone else? Did I leave anyone else out? Oh, Meehan. And then Meehan's a higher level competitor, and he's a bit of a jack of all trades guy, but not a vanilla, not as we say, not a vanilla guy. But he's very aggressive. He closes very quickly. He plays a real attack based game from the blue line, which we like. And he plays an attack based game both defensively and transitionally. So he's not just a one dimensional guy. He looks like a good blend defenseman. He was injured. He only played about a little over a third of the season. So the fact that Tony and Teddy had known him from years past certainly helped us in terms of that pick.
We haven't even touched on Byfield. I mean, obviously that was the big news yesterday. Quinton Byfield, we learned a couple months ago, we got the number 2 pick. The hockey world has this sort of neck and neck between that young man and the young man from Germany. Tell us everything, Mark.
Well, the first thing is you've never heard us say it was between Stützle and Byfield. So again, there's a lot of assumptions there, and there was a lot of assumptions that it was only 2 players. So again, there were a tier of players that we started out with, and then we narrowed it down to fewer than that. It was a hard decision. It really was. It was a hard decision in terms of separating players there, because they have, again, if you guys asked about Stützle and Byfield, so I'll explain Stützle versus Byfield, even though I'm not saying that's what it was for us. But you have completely opposite players. You have a cerebral skill first playmaking guy versus a bigger power forward, speed based, long speed based guy. And each guy had what the other, while Quinton didn't have Stützle's higher level hockey sense, he had high level hockey sense. And while Stützle didn't have some of that rush based, take it to the middle things, he took the puck to the middle. So they neither one, I don't think either one had a deficiency. But it was very hard to separate, because in their own rights, they're fairly even level players. Now, when you bring in the philosophy of how Rob and Todd want the team to play, and the plan of how they want to build the team and how they want the team to eventually contend, then the decision becomes easier. You could actually have a Stützle and a Byfield rated dead even, in which case you think the decision would be hard, but the decision's easy. So the only way the decision would become hard is if the player not named Byfield was a much higher level player. But Byfield fit every box that Todd and Rob have established for the team to learn to win. So even though players were close, the decision at the end was, again, it wasn't easy to make, but it also wasn't agonizingly hard to make.
Um, you don't have everybody loves grades. I'm not going to ask you for your grade for this draft class at this moment, but when do you think, based off of your experience, it's fair for a particular draft class to get a grade?
If you want to use the whole draft class, the whole class, if you want to grade the draft, it's 5 years. I mean, you certainly can know there were some failures or successes before 5 years, but if you try to grade your draft before 5 years, um, you're going to be making a lot of revisions. We used to do that with Dean. One of Dean's biggest thing is your ability to self-evaluate, to critique yourself, to honestly critique yourself. So we would research each draft a year after, and the amount of this guy, we really made a mistake here, and we really knocked out of the park here, and then a year later you're saying the exact opposite things. I know Thomas Hickey was an obviously polarizing pick, and I think I've been pretty honest in terms of that. While he played almost 500 games in the NHL, it was not a successful pick. It was not the right pick. But I use him as an example. Based on perception, the day we drafted him, we were idiots. Great, that's fair. He was off the board. He was drafted much higher. And then the same independent services and media 7 months later, or 10, whatever it was, when Thomas Hickey was captain of the Canadian team, said, how did everybody miss on Hickey? This is the biggest steal. And this, they finally proved that, they were, and then 2 years later, he can't make our team in LA, and he's on waivers for nothing, and you're back to idiots again. Well, again, the guy played 500 games almost, so you're not idiots, but it certainly wasn't a successful pick. And if you looked at it a year later, it looks like a successful pick. And if you look at it 2 years later, you're back to it being an unsuccessful pick. So, there's just, you can look at a guy like Drew and he's a successful pick very early. You can look at a guy like Kopi and you don't know it right off the bat, but you're very intrigued that first year post-draft. Then the second year post-draft, it. And then guys like Voinov take, there were people that thought, maybe he was a bust of a pick at 32. And then all of a sudden he's got two. So, if Voinov would be in that thing like, oh, geez, I wish he did more. Oh, my God, he's an American League All-Star. Oh, but he hasn't developed. He's not on that team yet. And then he's so good that you're able to take Jack Johnson and trade him and get Carter and make that piece to win the playoffs. So I think 5 years for the entirety, although there will be players in this draft that you can certainly start to get a feel for draft year +1, draft year +2, draft year +3.
I know you talked to some of the people on the Zoom individually or whatnot since the 2019 draft. This is, I think, the first time you've probably talked to the group collectively since, the end of that draft. If I could have given you a crystal ball that night and said you and I would be chatting in this manner, you'd have a mask. We'd be at Toyota Sports Performance Center, which wasn't even that name at that time. Would you have believed me? And how challenged have you and this staff been professionally by this uniqueness?
Well, we've been challenged. I mean, again, it's been an exceptional challenge, only in a sense that you have to. I mean, again, whether it's traditionalities, it can be a curse. It can stifle creativity, but there's a traditional way we've done things. And again, it obviously works to a degree because we've been successful. We built a team, and now we're putting another one of the top couple of prospect pools together. But it was a challenge in terms of changing some of the ways we do things. But I didn't find it all that hard for the most part. I think we've already found 4 or 5 different ways to build a better mousetrap. Just by having to do things differently and just by seeing what happened when we do them differently. I think our scouting staff going forward, and again, we were heading in a direction, obviously not this drastic, but we've been heading in a direction like this for about 5 years. And again, it allowed us we had some ideas and some procedures we were doing some beta testing on, some things we thought, geez, this might be cool, this might work. I'm not sure when we can implement it. Well, now was the time to implement it. So some of those worked really well, some didn't. But again, we got a lot of data just in terms of the process of how we need to do things and how we can better do things. The only thing that, we found a couple things don't work. The live component of interviews and meetings, regardless of technology, we weren't able to bridge that gap. They don't work as well in a virtual setting. So everything other than that was an initial challenge that I didn't find to be too challenging as we went through the process. The meetings and the interviews were a challenge the whole time, and I don't know that we solved that challenge.
Last two questions. I don't know if this one came in before or after. You kind of touched upon it a little. I think your answer was everyone had more time to scout, but Dennis Bernstein's asking, why does Mark think this draft fell so close to his board? Luck, predictability of talent usually doesn't happen that way.
No, he's right. It seldom happens that way. I can think of one other draft since I've been here where it's happened like this. And this one was even more so. I think there were a couple factors, especially early. I'm guessing. I certainly have some information because I pay attention to what others are doing and listen. I think a lot of staffs took the extra time and really hammered out like those top 30, those top 40, those top 45 guys. Again, this is what I think. And when you're all focusing on the perceived top 40 guys, at least in the first round, at least 25 to 30 of those guys are going to be very similar. So I think what ended up happening is a lot of those guys got more focus and then got brought closer together. You look at, I forget what was, we were watching some of the coverage as it was going on. I think McKenzie went 28 out of 31 on his list. I mean, I think you'd see that for a lot of people. And I had spoken to him after the draft when he had asked me some questions about Quentin. And he said it's the highest percentage they've ever hit. So I think the pandemic obviously had something to do that. I think people had said it was a deep draft. I think the tier this year, I think everybody thought the tier was right around 10. There's obviously some mini tiers in there, but I think everybody had a very similar 10, which then meant that guys were focusing on that 11 to 25, that 11 to 30, which again, probably brought it closer together. I don't think there was many risky picks this year. I didn't see as many, there were some, but usually there's more off the board picks. It didn't seem to be that way. Now, maybe that's because you couldn't travel as much and see some of those later guys that just jump out at you. Maybe there's a little recency bias that happens in the end of the year. And then, you don't have that under 18 showcase where, you go to that under 18 showcase every single year. There's 4 or 5 guys that jump out and exceed what everyone thinks. And there's 4 or 5 guys that have tough tournaments and then they move up. So now all of a sudden you got, if it's a obscure 4 or 5 doing well and a good 4 or 5 doing bad, that just shotguns everything, right? Now, so I think there are a lot of things about it. But certainly I would figure the pandemic had something to do with it.
If this was late June, I think the last question that anyone asked would be about the 2021 draft. I think it's, a bit of a fair question here in October. Obviously, a lot of unknowns, but from your seat, 30 minutes removed from the 2020 draft, initial thoughts on 2021. Is there just not enough information? Is what you've experienced the last 6-7 months so beneficial to you going forward that you're ready for anything and everything?
Well, you certainly try to be ready for anything and everything. I don't know. I mean, we actually, again, you think of what happened. We were actually pretty ready for the pandemic. So yeah, I think we're ready for. I think it might take a little tweaking here and there, but I think we're ready for a lot of things. This draft's coming up a really good draft, especially in terms of defensive depth. My initial impression of this draft, where you had a lot of forward heavy depth in that top 10, that top 20 of this year's draft. I think it's the exact opposite for next year's draft. I think you have, I just think it's the negative, the photographic negative. I think it's a similar talent level I just think the talent is more skewed towards the defensive side. And again, this is always the harder predictor. I think the goalie depth is a little bit deeper. I think it's a little deeper next year. I thought this was a shallow. There were some good goalies, don't get me wrong, but in terms of overall depth, I think this was a little more shallow of a draft.
Yankees usual, on behalf of the media, on behalf of our department, we of course thank you for your time, your insight, your information. You're the best, and we
Okay.
appreciate you and the staff, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.